toxic masculinity.
My headline says, on National Prayer Day, Joe Biden talks about race and climate, but not God. Apparently, he didn't even mention God once on National Prayer Day, but he talked about race and climate change, which is, of course, what the left is wont to do. Let's see here. Biden fails to mention God on the National Day of Prayer proclamation. Joe Biden released a proclamation in honor of Thursday's celebration of the National Day of Prayer, in which he failed to mention God. Instead, the president mentioned racial injustice. You know, Joe Biden may have released a proclamation, but he certainly didn't write the proclamation. I don't know who wrote it, but whoever wrote it is a degenerate. Okay. Instead, the president mentioned racial injustice, or whoever wrote it mentioned that, and racial justice, and included a reference to climate change. Concerning racial injustice, Biden's handler's proclamation, stated prayer has nourished countless souls and powered moral movements, including essential fights against racial injustice, child labor, and infringement on the rights of disabled Americans. Okay, whatever. This is ridiculous. The president later talked about, whoever wrote this, later talked about confronting the crises and challenges of our time, from a deadly pandemic to the loss of lives and livelihood in its wake, to a reckoning on racial justice and the existential threat of climate change. Give me a break. This guy, David Brody, noticed, doesn't even mention God once. How do you release a proclamation about prayer and not mention God at all? Of course, it mentions climate change and racial justice. Truly is pathetic and not surprising. So I guess this is the guy that really, first noticed this. As of Thursday afternoon, the president had not yet mentioned the National Day of Prayer on Twitter. On Wednesday, Biden found time to highlight Cinco de Mayo amid a still raging immigration crisis at the U.S.-Mexican border. I'll be honest, I don't really know what Cinco de Mayo is. I think it's Mexican Independence Day or something like that, right? It's funny that we celebrate it here in America. I think the reason we celebrate Cinco de Mayo is because people like to drink. It's an excuse to drink. Because the funny thing about, I understand St. Patrick's Day in America, right? Because St. Patrick's Day is a very much a culturally specific holiday. And you could make the same argument for Oktoberfest, because both of those holidays there's a huge percentage of the population that is Irish, and there's a huge population that is German. So if you've got a portion of the population that's Irish and they're celebrating St. Patrick's Day, and they invite their friends who are Italian or German or English or whatever, then everybody starts to celebrate St. Patrick's Day, and over the years it becomes a big thing. I don't think Cinco de Mayo was a big thing until fairly recently, in the past, 10, 20 years, something like that. And most of the people I see celebrating Cinco de Mayo are not Mexican. They're like white people, and there's no Mexican people to be seen for miles, right? They're just drinking. So I think Cinco de Mayo is essentially really nothing to do with Mexican independence anymore. It's to do with drinking. I think it's just an excuse to drink. But that said, I think Oktoberfest is kind of similar, because I am German and I like to go to Oktoberfest. We have a big Oktoberfest festival in Oktoberfest Festival, that's a little redundant, in Oregon, and I've been to that a couple of times, and that's quite a bit of fun. And I'm not really sure how that emerged, because I don't remember that when I was a kid. I don't remember Oktoberfest being a big thing when I was a kid. That's kind of emerged more recently as well. So I don't think that's been a part of the American tradition like St. Patrick's Day. So I will say that I think probably Oktoberfest is something similar. Oktoberfest is has become a big deal more recently, I think, because people like to drink and they want an excuse. That's my guess. I don't know. I could be wrong. Maybe it was always big, maybe in the Midwest, where there was a lot of Germans, right? That's where my ancestors first came before we moved to the West Coast. Completely irrelevant to this story, but yeah, they brought it up, so I thought I'd talk about it. Todd Starnes has written, regardless... All right, gosh, I'm being texted like crazy. What do you guys want? What do you want? What do you want? Okay. Pointless text. All right. Regardless of Biden's godless National Day of Prayer proclamation, the problem with the Democrats is that they don't believe that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. They believe that we are endowed by the government. Oh, Todd Starnes? Must be Todd Starnes. Todd Starnes, you are so right. You are so right. Look, the Democrat Party is the party of atheism. Now, if you're an atheist and you're a conservative, you know what? Like, I'm a Christian, I'm a conservative, but we agree on a lot, okay? And, like, I'm friends with Carl Benjamin, Sargon of Akkad. I mean, we're not, like, super close or anything. I'm not trying to name drop here. I'm just trying to point something out. It's like, Carl Benjamin is an atheist. I used to listen to Sargon of Akkad videos, and I like what he has to say. I don't like what he has to say about Christianity a lot of the time. I don't agree with him on that stuff. But I do respect a lot of what he says, because a lot of what he says makes sense. Now, there's something that I always thought was weird when I was a kid, is that, like, atheists, when I was younger, atheists were always Democrats. Always Democrats. I never met an atheist that wasn't a Democrat, and they were incredibly hostile to conservatives, incredibly hostile to Christians. And then Jordan Peterson came along, and Jordan Peterson kind of presented the argument that traditional values don't necessarily need to be associated with the supernatural, right? To be respected. You can have traditional values, or you can respect traditional values, and you can ignore the spiritual side of Christianity. You can say, okay, Christianity, maybe there is no God, maybe there's no, maybe Jesus was not the Son of God, maybe all the Christian traditions are not realistic or sensible, but the Christian ethic is, right? The Christian philosophy is, the ethics and the principles are valuable. And the reason, Jordan Peterson has a whole system of ideas, philosophies, that if you pay attention to it, it's sort of explains why Christian ethics make sense in our world, and regardless of whether or not there's a God, right? And when I was a kid, and here's the funny thing about that, when I was a kid, and when you're like a teenager, you kind of have to make a decision at some point. Like, am I going to accept the religion of my ancestors, or am I going to reject that because of evolution and science and whatever? Or am I going to join another religion? Or how am I going to look at the world? And so I would pray about this sort of thing fairly frequently, and I would read the Bible, and I would read about religion, and I would try to get a sense of it for myself, so that I wouldn't simply be somebody who was just believing something because his parents did or whatever. I wanted a substantive foundation for whatever it is that I ended up believing. And so I looked into this a lot, and I thought about this stuff a lot, and I prayed about this stuff a lot. And what I ended up concluding, especially through reading the Bible, through prayer, and this sort of thing, I was able to develop a sort of a perception about Christianity, which is the same thing that Jordan Peterson teaches, essentially, which is that even if you're not a Christian, Christian teachings are super valuable. Super valuable. Like, a lot of the stuff in the Bible, if you follow it, it will make your life better, right? It will. And so this idea that, let's just throw away Christian, ideas because I don't believe in the Christian God. I think that that's like a mythical story, and I don't think it's real. That's a huge mistake, right? And I was trying to figure out, even as a kid, even as a teenager, I was trying to figure out, how do you convince people to respect traditional values if they don't believe in God, right? And Jordan Peterson was able to actually kind of do that, which I thought was fantastic. And so since the emergence of Jordan Peterson, and maybe a little bit before with like Douglas Murray and people like that as well, there has been more of a shift by some atheists to recognize the value of some traditional ideas, and also of just conservative political ideas. And so you do have a lot of atheists now sharing the views of Christians in terms of politics. But the Republican Party and the conservative political philosophy here in America is still based on Christian values, Christian ethics. And what we see, and atheists who are conservatives might find this offensive, but this is true. I think this is totally true. The left's philosophy is all based on a lack of Christian principles, right? I might say. I would say that it's more than just like based on atheist principles, because what are atheist principles? I mean, I guess just whatever you want, really. There is no like sort of book of atheism. It's just a lack of belief in Christian ideas. But so I would go further than that. I would say it's a rejection of Christian values. The left's point of view, the Democrat Party, their political philosophy is based on a rejection of Christian values. There is one Christian value that has been adopted by the left and then distorted, and then they use that basically to justify everything. And that particular Christian value is love your enemy. Right, love your enemy, and so the idea of love your enemy, I think can be interpreted as love someone who is not necessarily somebody that you would trust or love based on some kind of familial relationship, right? So like naturally, most people will love their family. Naturally, most people will love their friends. Naturally, many people will love their neighbors and the people in their town and that sort of thing. But then when you go beyond that, to the next town, to the next village, when you go to the next country, when you go to the next race, when you go to the next culture, when you go to the next continent, the next civilization, well, then you start to have the fear of the other, right? The fear of the other. And we don't get that quite as much anymore in modern times because the world has shrunk so much in terms of, you can go anywhere, you can experience anything, you can watch TV, you can get a sense of what it's like in Thailand or whatever. So we don't fear the other as much as we used to in the olden days. But this concept of the enemy, I think can very easily be interpreted as the other as well. Those who you find to be scary or different or not part of your group. Because like every other tribe would be to some degree an enemy. You would have to think that in ancient times in order to keep your people safe. And so I think in ancient times, the concept of the enemy and the concept of the other were to some degree interchangeable. And because of that, I often say, that the Bible actually encourages people not to be racist, right? And obviously it was like Northern European Christians who abolished slavery, in Northern Europe and in America and Australia and so, everywhere, Canada, everywhere where Northern Europeans inhabited, we abolished slavery. And so that made sense. That was all based on Christian teachings. That all made sense to me. Of course it makes sense. But now the left has said, okay, so this idea of loving your enemy, it has now kind of been distorted into this idea of, okay, these are values for white people. And not only do they have to love their enemy, they have to prefer their enemy, right? And it's not, and of course, it's not enemy, it's other people that are not necessarily the enemy anymore. I don't think most white people consider black people the enemy. Now, I could reverse that and say, I don't think most black people think white people are the enemy, but I'm not sure that's true. I actually think a lot of black people think white people are the enemy. And so this particular ethic doesn't apply to everyone. It only applies to white, Americans with European descent and Europeans as well. And we have to not only embrace the other, but we have to prefer the other. So the other, we have to take a knee and we have to bow to the other, and the other is now more important than us. We have to give up our own happiness and our own welfare for that of the other now. That is now the new ethic on the left. So there's this bizarre distortion of Christian values on the left and it's almost like Christian values have been used as a weapon to target white people, to target Christians, to target men. And so, so you do so the left is derived to some degree from Christian values, but it's been distorted horribly, right? And I think a lot of Christians believe that there is a tendency for Satan, the devil, evil, whatever you want to call it. If you're an atheist, maybe just call it like a tendency of people's selfish desires, or whatever you want to say, to distort Christian values in nefarious ways, right? There's this kind of fear with Christians, especially, well, it's not like a fear like we're always afraid of it, but you know what I mean? Like, there's a concern among Christians that Christian ideas can be distorted for the purposes of bad people, right? A bad person can, and that is kind of like the worst kind of evil when it's like a priest who does. That's why obviously the Catholic scandals were so horrible, because these are people that are considered to be the best people in society, right? People that we're all supposed to trust. Priests, you're supposed to trust a priest, or supposed to be able to trust a priest. So if a priest does something criminal, or a priest victimizes somebody, that's the worst kind of person, right? Because they're actually using Christianity to either to hide what they're doing, to hide the bad things they're doing, or even to facilitate the bad things that they're doing. They're distorting Christian values to justify the bad things that they're doing, that's the worst kind of evil to most Christians, I think. All right, well, that was a long tangent. For real. But this is about Joe Biden ignoring God on National Prayer Day. Let me go ahead and read a little bit more here from the story, so we can bring it back to this story. Biden's remarks did quote the late Georgia Democrat Representative John Lewis's words: "Nothing can stop the power of a committed and determined people to make a difference in our society." Why? Because human beings are the most dynamic link to the divine on this planet, Biden wrote, quoting Lewis. In May 2020, then President Donald Trump released a statement for National Day of Prayer. Trump mentioned God 11 times. Trump noted in his proclamation, "As one nation under God, we share a legacy." I'm not sure I care about that. I'm not sure that should have been included in this, because I'm not sure how devoted a Christian that Donald Trump was. That's probably the thing that I was the most critical of him for. But at the end of the day, I think that Trump is probably effectively an atheist, if not an agnostic. I've never really heard him sincerely talking about Christianity. He said something about the little wine and the little bread or something like that. That was like super patronizing. So I don't think of Trump as a Christian. I don't know if you guys do, but I certainly don't. And that's not something that I ever really cared about. If he could run the country well, it didn't matter to me that he was necessarily Christian. The reason why it's important to me that presidents are Christian is because I want them to be guided to do the right thing in every instance, and I think Christianity will help somebody to do that. But in the case of Donald Trump, I think he was doing the right thing almost, if not all the time, almost all the time, and regardless of his Christian values. Now, there were some things that I disagreed with that Donald Trump did. I didn't try to criticize him too much when he was president, because the Democrats were doing that already quite a lot. But the things that I would have criticized him for were obviously different than what the Democrats would have criticized him for. But I do think the lack of Christianity with Donald Trump was a detriment to some degree. I do think that he would have governed a little bit differently, probably better, certainly better, if he were a Christian, or if he were a devout Christian. I don't think that he is. You guys may disagree with that. If you do, write your comments down. Wait for the end of the show. I will read them. Okay, let's move on to the next story. Oh, this is a good one, guys. Actually, this is my favorite story of the day. I should have put this at the end, but there's a really important story at the end, so I left that. But this crazy story. Okay. School district tells principals to create fake curriculum to send to parents after complaints of indoctrination. This is, seriously, folks, this is unbelievable. Oops, let me switch to my view here. Okay, there we go. All right, so this is crazy. So, Toxic Masculinity, weekdays, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific.